Hey, what's up, y'all? How's it going? Thanks for tuning into my review of The Weeknd's fifth studio album, Dawn FM. And The Weeknd needs no introduction at this point, as he's taken the world by storm with his previous projects. But I'd like to go briefly over my experience with his last project, After Hours, since I have things to speak on in regards to that project and how it affected my listen of Dawn FM. Now, going into Dawn FM, I was hoping that it would be a better experience than After Hours was for me. I realize that this may be an unpopular opinion, but I wasn't the biggest fan of After Hours when it first came out. I believe that I was expecting this album in place of what was given on After Hours. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like the dark aesthetic that After Hours had to offer, but I was expecting more of a concept album for him, and that's what I got on Dawn FM. And that wasn't the only thing that led to my disappointment on the project, though. I wasn't a big fan of the tracks like Scared to Live, Snow Child, and Escape from LA. Not that these are bad tracks at all, but I feel like there are more highlights on the back end of the project. On the track Snow Child, some of his flows and lyrics don't really do it for me, and the overall style that he was going for on the track didn't really set well with me. Escape from LA is a pretty cinematic track, but each time I listen to the album, whether that be actively or casually, I find it to be rather forgettable. And the track Scared to Live follows a generic pop structure, and the instrumental is just good and doesn't go beyond that for me. However, After Hours did include some of my favorite Weeknd tracks to date. Alone Again immediately became one of my favorite intro tracks by him when I first put on the album. And the track Heartless was a banger of a lead single. Faith was a track that I initially didn't like, but it had grown on me recently. And the title track After Hours is up there among the best songs Abel has made. And being a longtime fan of The Weeknd, I was hoping for more than just a good album, and with After Hours, I guess it wasn't it for me. With all that in mind, I can firmly say that After Hours is an enjoyable album, which I would rank it about like a 7.5 out of 10. But I think Dawn FM does a better job with creating a full, complete sonic experience with how well the tracks fit with each other, and the use of interludes and the inclusion of Jim Carrey, who essentially narrates throughout the entire record. To start with the first track, Dawn FM opens up the album with a guest appearance by Jim Carrey, who is the main radio station host of 103.5 Dawn FM. This track introduces us to the record by The Weeknd stating that he's taken the lead into a transition into the afterlife. Jim reinforces the sentiment by laying down lines that state that this will be a smooth transition away from being in the dark too long and then going into the light. He speaks on this with a very smooth and nonchalant tone, but it's kind of an unnerving one, but a solid way to introduce the album. Definitely not as grand as an opening compared to Alone Again from After Hours, but it does the job it needs to as an introduction. Then we go into the next bunch of tracks, and that starts with Gasoline. And I'm very glad that Abel took a different approach than normal to open up the first full track on the album. It was pretty weird to hear at first, but after the second listen I was pretty pulled in. While using this laid-back delivery, The Weeknd describes his drugged-out nihilistic state at dawn with the girl he's currently with. He expresses his lack of faith in the afterlife while also stating that he has nothing to live for in his current life. And if he ODs, he wants her to burn or even cremate his body, which links to the use of gasoline on this track. The transitions on this project are also worth a mention at this point. The track How Do I Make You Love Me is a good example of these transitions as it transitions into Take My Breath with some shimmering synth sounds, a solid drum pattern, and the breaths that he takes that continues into the intro of Take My Breath. As some of you may know, Take My Breath was the first single of the project that was released in 2021. It was initially a shorter version, but he had released an extended version of that single, and that's going to be the version that appears on Dawn FM. I'm really glad that he decided to go with an extended version on the album, as it adds to the overall aesthetic of the Dawn, and it just sounds great with all of its space for the instrumental to shine. The added panning of Abel's robotic vocal sample in the beginning is a great addition, and that wasn't in the original cut as well. Abel speaks about this girl who finds the utmost pleasure from the drug she's taking, and Abel can provide that with her with ease to fulfill her desires. This is also so that he can gain her love, but he doesn't want her to continuously risk her life by taking these substances. I'm really enamored with the longer instrumental passage towards the end of the track, while Abel isn't saying much, but he's just sounding amazing. On the interlude with Mr. Quincy Jones, he goes into depth about his upbringing and how it affected him throughout his life on this introspective interlude. This is backed by a lo-fi city pop beat, which is led by some looming space-like synths and deep-sounding bass as it leads into the next track. The city pop banger, At a Time, follows a Tale by Quincy, which has its instrumental sampled from the song Midnight Pretenders by Tomoko Aaron. It's a great sounding sample with a lush and wet instrumental, and The Weeknd does a fantastic job of singing on this beat. My favorite parts are his performances on the pre-chorus and the chorus, because if anybody knows how to get into those higher registers, it's going to be The Weeknd. There's also the track Is There Someone Else, which had initially been my favorite from the track list. Not by a large margin compared to the other tracks, but I like how the beat somewhat clips on every second and fourth beat. It reminds me of a musical strobe light of sorts, if that makes any sense. The pitched up vocal samples in the beginning and at the end of the last chorus sound good as well. And I also love how ethereal and dreamy the beat sounds, especially towards the end of the song as it transitions into Starry Eyes. Speaking of Starry Eyes, this track feels like a continuation of the prior track, Is There Someone Else, as it does have a smooth and seamless transition, but I don't think it warrants an additional track. If the track was just added to the end of Is There Someone Else, then it would have made for a near perfect track, and a good way to close out is the song Is There Someone Else. And how can I review this album without talking about Less Than Zero? Bro, Abel gives one of his best vocal performances on the album on here. The addition of the acoustic guitar on this instrumental was an appropriate one, and I also like the rising synth that builds up into the chorus. There are also some great sound choices with the instrumental on here, as the final product sounds a lot brighter when put together. He gives some lyrics speaking on him not being able to be the right fit for this chick, or potentially not being enough. He thought that he could give this girl the light, but he also ruminates on the fact that he may be worse than the person of value, and he feels as if him and his actions could impact this girl negatively as opposed to being like doing nothing for her at all. I'm a big fan of Every Angel Is Terrifying, and I'm glad it's on the album. It opens up with some beaming synths and Abel vocalizing over them. Then it transitions into this angelic choir that sings in the background as Abel recites a poem. Then the synths come back in to build up into a commercial that attempts to sell the listener, or Abel, into the afterlife. This part of the instrumental that is playing as the commercial is airing sounds great as well. But I do think that the commercial on this track is a bit too long, but not long enough to ruin the track as a whole for me. For the tracks Here We Go Again and I Heard You Married, they contain features from Lil Wayne and Tyler the Creator. Tyler's performance seemed a bit dry and out of place for me at first, but it grew on me as I listened to it more. He definitely adds to the track's subject matter and gives a decent verse on Here We Go Again. Wayne's verse on the other hand doesn't fit in with the track I Heard You Married, in my opinion. His voice sounds a bit uneasy throughout the verse, and he gives some alright bars here and there, but he also gives some questionable ones too. It's unfortunate too because Wayne has been on fire with the features from last year, like on Tyler's track A Hot Wind Blows and Bash Money on West Side Gun's project. Wayne's verse on here doesn't ruin the track for me, since I do like the additional supporting ad-libs he gives to Abel's verse after, but I do think he could have given a better performance overall, especially from what we've seen from him in the past. I neglected discussing the subject matter of his lyrics too in depth so I can try to put everything together at the end, but I reached a conclusion about the record overall. A lot of Abel's lyrics go back and forth on what he wants with whatever girl he's dealing with at the time. At some points he seems like he's struggling to find or get soul affection from this girl, like on the tracks How Do I Make You Love Me, Is There Someone Else, and I Heard You're Married. Then on the other hand, he appears to be better off without this girl and has moved on to a new girl despite his past with these relationships, best represented by the track Here We Go Again. He also seems to resist being tied down by a relationship on the track Sacrifice and doesn't want to take that relationship further by avoiding being hurt on the track Best Friends. This flip-flopping narrative on the album had me confused at first, but the best way I can explain it being in this way is that the whole project seems like Abel's taking a look back on his life experiences as he transfers into the afterlife. This explains why it's a more jumbled narrative, as it's more of a mix of past experiences, and it being a mock radio station of sorts reinforces this theory. Lastly, the thing with me and The Weeknd's lyrics is that they don't really take much throughout to dig into, but his singing and backing production make up for this area. To wrap it all up, I think this project is a great effort from The Weeknd, and I feel like it was more enjoyable than After Hours for me personally. From the mixing and mastering on the instrumentals, the collaborations with notorious acts such as One Tricks Point Never, Daft Punk, and a few others made this whole project a cinematic experience, and the weaker solo vocal performances make this a strong way to enter 2022. I'm going to give this album a strong 8.5 out of 10.